The champagne was already flowing. The music was loud. The laughter felt endless. Hollywood stars, record executives, friends, hangers-on, everyone who mattered was inside Graceland that night, celebrating Elvis Presley. Another successful tour, another milestone, another reason to toast the king. And then, without warning, Elvis stood up, put his glass down, and walked out. No argument, no announcement, no explanation. Guests thought it was a joke at first. Some laughed. Others waited for him to come back. He never did. What happened during those few minutes inside the party that made Elvis Presley walk away from his own celebration? Why did no one realize, until much later, that this wasn't arrogance or moodiness, but something far deeper? Stay until the end. Because the truth behind that night reveals a side of Elvis few people ever saw, and one decision he would carry quietly for the rest of his life. The party at Graceland was exactly what people expected from Elvis Presley. Too much food, too much music, too many people who didn't really belong there. The living room was packed, cigarette smoke hanging thick in the air, glasses clinking, voices overlapping in a constant roar of celebration. Someone laughed too loudly near the piano. Someone else bragged about a deal that hadn't even been signed yet. Elvis stood near the center of it all, dressed impeccably, smiling when expected, nodding at the right moments. But his eyes weren't smiling. From the outside, he looked relaxed, confident, generous, gracious as ever. Inside, he felt strangely detached, like he was watching the scene through glass. He lifted his drink, but didn't take a sip. Across the room, a producer clapped him on the shoulder. "Hell of a run, Elvis. You just keep outdoing yourself." Elvis smiled politely. "Thank you, sir." Another voice cut in. "To the king!" someone shouted. The room erupted in cheers. Elvis raised his glass this time, not because he wanted to, but because everyone was watching. The crowd leaned in, cameras flashed, glasses lifted high. "To Elvis!" they roared. He nodded again, but something inside him tightened. As the cheers faded into music once more, Elvis's gaze drifted across the room. He saw faces he barely recognized. People who knew his name, his money, his value, but not him. He spotted a woman laughing near the fireplace, someone he couldn't remember inviting. A man near the door talked loudly about future shows, future profits, future plans, none of which included asking Elvis what he wanted. And then he heard it. Not a shout, not a laugh, a sentence, spoken casually behind him. "As long as he keeps performing, we're all eating good." Elvis froze. The words weren't meant to be cruel. That was the worst part. They were said like a fact, like gravity, like something obvious. He turned slowly, but the man who said it was already laughing again, blending back into the noise. Elvis's jaw tightened. He had heard variations of that sentence his whole life, whispered, joked about, sometimes disguised a concern. But something about hearing it inside his own home, at his own party, landed differently. He set his glass down on the nearest table. The music felt louder now, the lights harsher. Every laugh felt slightly off, slightly forced. Charlie passed by him and noticed the change immediately. "You all right, E?" he asked quietly. Elvis nodded out of habit. "Yeah." But his eyes betrayed him. Charlie frowned. But before he could say anything else, someone pulled him away to ask about a song request. Elvis stood there alone again. He looked down at his hands. They were steady, too steady. That scared him more than shaking ever had. He took a slow breath and scanned the room one last time. The faces, the noise, the celebration built around a version of himself he barely recognized anymore. And suddenly he knew, if he stayed another minute, something inside him would break. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, permanently. Without saying a word, Elvis turned toward the hallway. No announcement, no goodbye, just the soft sound of his footsteps moving away from the party that was supposed to honor him. Behind him, the laughter continued. No one noticed he was gone. Not yet. Elvis didn't grab his coat. He didn't tell the guards. He simply walked out the side door of Graceland and into the humid Tennessee night. The sound of the party dissolving behind him like it had never belonged to him in the first place. The driveway lights cast long shadows as he crossed the gravel, each step slower than the last. For a moment, he stood there, listening. Laughter leaked through the walls. Music pulsed faintly, alive and careless. None of it followed him outside. He got into the car alone. The engine turned over softly. Elvis rested his hands on the steering wheel and just sat there, breathing. For years, leaving a room had meant escaping fans or schedules or expectations. Tonight, it felt like he was leaving a version of himself behind. He pulled onto the road without a plan. No destination. No clock. Just asphalt unfolding beneath the headlights. The radio crackled on its own. A DJ's voice filled the car, cheerful and distant, followed by a familiar guitar riff. One of his songs. An old one. Elvis's jaw tightened. He reached out and turned the radio off. Silence rushed in. As the miles passed, the house, the party, the noise faded into memory. Streetlights came and went. Small towns slipped by unnoticed. Elvis drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting in his lap, fingers flexing slowly, like they were remembering something they'd forgotten how to do. He thought about the faces at the party, the smiles that didn't reach the eyes, the congratulations that felt rehearsed, the way people talked about him when they thought he wasn't listening. He wasn't angry. That was the unsettling part. He felt empty. At a red light, Elvis caught his reflection in the windshield. His own face ghosted over the dark road ahead. He barely recognized the man staring back. The hair was perfect, the clothes expensive, the eyes tired in a way no amount of sleep seemed to fix. "Who the hell are you doing this for?" he muttered to himself. The light turned green. He kept driving. Somewhere outside of town, the road narrowed. Trees closing on both sides. The darkness deeper, quieter. Elvis slowed down and eventually pulled over near an empty overlook. Nothing but a low guardrail and suggestion of hills beyond it. He cut the engine. The silence was complete now. Elvis stepped out of the car and leaned against the hood, looking out into the dark. The air smelled like damp earth and leaves. No cameras. No applause. No expectations. Just him. For a long time, he stood there, hands in his pockets, breathing slowly, trying to listen to his own thoughts, something he rarely allowed himself to do. That's when he heard footsteps on gravel. Elvis stiffened, instinct kicking in. He turned. A man stood a few feet away, older, wearing a worn jacket, hands visible, cautious. He looked surprised, not starstruck, just surprised. "Didn't mean to scare you," the man said. "Didn't think anyone else would be out here tonight." Elvis studied him. No recognition flashed across the man's face. No widening eyes. No sudden reverence. "That's all right," Elvis replied. The man nodded toward the road. "Car trouble?" "No," Elvis said. "Just needed to stop." The man considered that, then nodded like he understood more than he should. "Yeah," he said. "Sometimes that's reason enough." They stood there in silence, two strangers sharing the dark. After a moment, the man spoke again. "Funny thing about parties," he said. "They're loudest when nobody's listening." Elvis felt something shift in his chest. "You got people waiting on you?" the man asked. Elvis thought of Graceland, the music, the raised glasses, the celebration continuing without him. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think so." The man gave a small smile. "You don't sound too sure." Elvis wasn't. He looked back out at the darkness, the road stretching forward, unknown and quiet. For the first time that night, he wondered if walking out hadn't been an escape at all, but the beginning of a question he'd been avoiding for years. And he wasn't sure he was ready for the answer. The stranger didn't ask for an autograph. That alone unsettled Elvis. They stood side by side now, leaning against the guardrail, looking out into the darkness like two men killing time rather than sharing a moment that would quietly change everything. "You from around here?" the man asked. Elvis hesitated. He was used to giving answers that protected a myth. Tonight, the myth felt unnecessary. "Not really," he said. "I just passed through." The man nodded, accepting it without curiosity. "I used to pass through a lot, too. Thought moving meant I was going somewhere." Elvis glanced at him. "What made you stop?" The man smiled faintly. "Got tired of running from the same things." That landed deeper than Elvis expected. They stood in silence again. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed on a highway, headlights flashing briefly like a reminder that the world was still moving. "You look like a man who's done everything people asked of him," the stranger said suddenly. Elvis stiffened slightly, and still ain't sure it was enough. Elvis exhaled slowly through his nose. "You got a habit of reading folks?" The man shrugged. "I got a habit of listening. Folks tell you more when you don't interrupt." Elvis let out a short, almost surprised laugh. It felt strange in the quiet. "Most people don't listen," Elvis said. "They wait their turn to talk." "Or to take," the man replied. That word lingered between them. Elvis thought of the party again. The raised glasses. The plans made without him. The sentence he'd overheard. "As long as he keeps performing." "What do you do?" Elvis asked. The man scratched his jaw. "Used to build houses. Real ones. The kind you gotta stand back and look at when you're done." "Used to." Elvis asked. "Hands don't work like they used to," he said simply. "So now I fix what I can. Help where I can. Try not to lie to myself too much." Elvis looked down at his own hands. Manicured, ringed, steady. "I don't know how to stop," Elvis said before he could think better of it. The man didn't ask what he meant. "Most people don't," he said. "They just know they're tired." Elvis swallowed. What if stopping means everything falls apart? The man turned to him fully now. "What if it already is?" he asked gently. The words hit Elvis hard, not accusatory, not cruel, honest. The man continued. "You ever notice how folks clap loudest right before they leave?" Elvis nodded slowly. "They like the moment," the man said. "Doesn't always mean they'll stay." Elvis felt a tightness in his chest. Not panic, not fear. Recognition. "I don't know who I am without all of it," Elvis admitted quietly. The man rested his forearms on the rail. "That's usually when it's time to find out." A breeze moved through the trees. Elvis shivered slightly. "You got somewhere to go tonight?" the man asked. Elvis thought of Graceland again. The party still going. The noise still filling rooms he no longer occupied. "I think so," he said, though it sounded less certain now. The man nodded, pushing off the rail. "Then don't stay gone too long," he said. "But don't go back just 'cause it's easier." He took a few steps toward his truck, then stopped. "Oh," he added, glancing back. "Whatever you do for a living, make sure it don't cost you the rest of your life." Elvis watched him leave, gravel crunching softly under his boots until the sound disappeared completely. Left alone again, Elvis stayed where he was, staring out into the dark road ahead. For the first time that night, he didn't feel like he was running. He felt like he was standing still long enough to see himself clearly, and that scared him more than any crowd ever had. When Elvis finally turned the car around, the road back to Graceland felt shorter than it should have. Not because time had passed quickly, but because something inside him had shifted. The questions he'd been carrying no longer pressed against his chest the same way. They were still there, but quieter now, waiting. As the gates of Graceland came into view, Elvis slowed the car. The house glowed against the night, lights still on, music still pulsing faintly through the walls. The party hadn't stopped. He parked farther from the entrance than usual and sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. He listened. Laughter. A song playing too loud. The sound of celebration, continuing perfectly well without him. That hurt more than he expected. When he stepped inside through a side door, the smell of smoke and spilled liquor hit him immediately. Someone had turned the volume up. The energy had shifted, looser now, less formal, freer. No one noticed him at first. Elvis stood in the hallway, half hidden by shadows, watching his own party from the outside. People had rearranged themselves. Conversations had changed. Someone had taken his place at the piano, clumsily pounding out a tune, while others laughed. He realized with a quiet sting that the night had moved on. Charlie spotted him first. "Elvis," he said softly, relief flickering across his face as he crossed the room. "Where'd you go?" Elvis shrugged. "Just needed air." Charlie studied him, searching for something in his expression. "You okay?" Elvis hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." Charlie wasn't convinced, but he let it go. Across the room, Colonel Parker stood near a cluster of guests, smiling broadly, glass raised, telling a story Elvis had heard 100 times. When Parker's eyes finally landed on him, the smile faltered just slightly. "There he is." Parker boomed, louder than necessary. The man of the hour. Applause rippled half-heartedly through the room. Elvis smiled politely but didn't move closer. Parker approached him, voice lowering. "You disappeared," he said, not quite asking. "I needed a minute," Elvis replied. Parker's eyes narrowed. "This is your night." Elvis glanced around the room again. The noise, the movement, the faces glowing with borrowed celebration. "That's the problem," he said calmly. Parker frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Elvis met his gaze. "It means I don't feel like I'm in it anymore." The words hung between them, dangerous and unexpected. Parker forced a laugh. "You're tired. That happens. Tomorrow you'll feel different." Elvis shook his head slowly. "I don't think so." Parker's smile hardened. "Don't overthink it, son. People need you." Elvis thought a quiet road. The stranger's voice. "Make sure it don't cost you the rest of your life." "I need me," Elvis said. For a moment, Parker looked genuinely startled. Then the mask returned. "We'll talk later," Parker said. "Tonight's for celebration." Elvis watched him walk away, already redirecting the room's energy, already rewriting the moment. And suddenly, Elvis understood something with startling clarity. He could be surrounded by hundreds of people and still be entirely alone. The realization didn't crush him. It steadied him. He slipped away from the crowd again, this time unnoticed and unbothered. He climbed the stairs toward the quieter part of the house, each step pulling him farther from the noise. In his bedroom, the door closed softly behind him. The music faded. The silence returned. Elvis on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, replaying the night in fragments. The overheard sentence, the drive, the stranger's calm voice, the party that didn't need him. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a life where he wasn't always present. And for the first time, that idea didn't feel like failure. It felt like relief. Elvis didn't sleep. He lay on the bed fully dressed, hands folded over his chest, staring at the faint patterns of streetlights cast across the ceiling. Downstairs, the party slowly unraveled, laughter thinning out, music turning uneven, guests drifting away one by one. Each sound felt distant now, like it belonged to another house, another life. At some point past midnight, the noise stopped completely. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was honest. Elvis sat up and swung his legs over the side of the bed. His feet touched the floor, grounding him. He stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to look out over the lawn. Cars leaving, taillights disappearing into the dark, people going home with pieces of his night that meant nothing to him anymore. He felt strangely calm. For years, decisions had been made around him by managers, schedules, expectations, momentum. Even when he agreed, it never felt like choosing. It felt like keeping up. Tonight was different. Elvis crossed the room to the desk and opened a drawer he rarely used. Inside were scattered papers, old notes, half-written thoughts he'd never finished. He pulled out a blank sheet and sat down. The pen felt heavier than a microphone ever had. He didn't write a declaration, didn't write a plan. He wrote a single sentence. "I won't live like this forever." He stared at the words for a long moment, then folded the paper carefully and tucked it back into the drawer. It wasn't a promise to anyone else. It was a line he'd drawn quietly just for himself. A soft knock came at the door. "E!" Charlie's voice. Elvis opened it. Charlie looked tired, his tie loosened, eyes searching Elvis's face. "Party's over," he said. "You all right?" Elvis nodded. "Yeah." Charlie hesitated. "You scared some folks tonight." Elvis smiled faintly. "I scare myself." Charlie leaned against the doorframe. "That's usual when things change." Elvis met his eyes. "I think they already did." Charlie studied him for a moment, then nodded, accepting the answer without needing more. "Get some rest," he said. "I will." Elvis replied, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a lie. After Charlie left, Elvis sat back down on the bed. He thought of the stranger by the roadside, of the sentence he'd overheard at the party, of how easily the night had continued without him. The realization didn't make him bitter. It made him free, because if the machine could keep running without him for a few hours, then maybe he didn't have to be inside it every second of his life. Elvis lay back and closed his eyes, not to escape, but to listen to his own breath, to the quiet, to the unfamiliar feeling of choosing something without asking permission. Downstairs, Graceland slept, and somewhere between the man the world demanded and the man he was finally allowing himself to be, Elvis Presley rested, knowing that when morning came, nothing would look different to anyone else. But everything had already changed. Morning arrived quietly at Graceland. No headlines screamed his name. No calls demanded explanations. No one rushed into his room asking where he'd gone or why he'd left. That, more than anything, stayed with Elvis. He woke later than usual, sunlight filtering through the curtains, painting soft lines across the floor. For a moment, he didn't remember the party, the drive, the stranger, or the sentence that had cut through him like a blade. Then it all came back, and instead of dread, he felt clarity. Elvis sat up slowly and listened to the house. The faint clatter of dishes in the kitchen, footsteps moving normally, life continuing, steady and unbothered. No one was waiting for an explanation. He showered, dressed simply, and walked downstairs. A staff member greeted him as if nothing unusual had happened. Charlie nodded from across the room, offering a look that said, "I see you," without pressing for words. Elvis appreciated that. He stepped outside onto the porch and looked out over the lawn. The place where hundreds of cars had filled the night before was empty now. No trace of celebration remained. No proof that it had mattered at all. That was when he understood something essential. Walking out hadn't been about anger, or rebellion, or disappointment. It had been about noticing. Noticing how easily the noise continued without him. Noticing how often he stayed where he felt invisible just because people expected him to. Noticing that no one had asked him if he was happy, only if he was present. He thought of the stranger on the road. Make sure it don't cost you the rest of your life. Elvis exhaled slowly. He would never explain that night publicly, never correct the rumors, never tell the story the way people wanted to hear it, because the truth wasn't dramatic enough for headlines. The truth was quieter. He had walked out because he finally listened to the part of himself that had been whispering for years. The part that didn't want applause. The part that wanted room to breathe. Later that day, someone asked him jokingly why he disappeared from his own party. Elvis smiled and shrugged. Just needed some air. And that was all he ever said. But every so often, in the years that followed, when the rooms grew too loud or the expectations too heavy, Elvis would remember that night, not as an escape, but as proof. Proof that he could leave. Proof that the world wouldn't collapse. Proof that choosing himself, even quietly, mattered. The party ended without him. The night went on. The legend remained. But somewhere beneath it all, Elvis Presley carried one private truth he never shared. That walking out wasn't weakness. It was the first time he realized he didn't have to stay, just to be loved. And that knowledge, silent, steady, uncelebrated, stayed with him long after the music faded.